Brand new week, State of the Union tomorrow night. Let's take a look at the broad picture.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
It's Patriots Week. Everybody's mind is on that, right? The State of the Union tomorrow night, and constant turbulence in Washington. Now the Deputy Director of the FBI has reportedly resigned today, most likely on a more of a HR benefits basis. He was saying he was leaving in March anyway, but Deputy Director McCabe is taking some leave, which will cause some turbulence. And our guest may have a thought on that, but mostly I want to get his perspective on economic issues and what the Trump campaign is doing, or the Trump presidency, rather, is doing that way. Of course, I want to get his take on what's happening in the state with the Paw Sox and some of the to and fro back and forth between the House and the Senate. And there's a political campaign that I know he supports. So we shall bring in Gary Sasse, who heads the Institute for Leadership at Bryant, in just a moment. But, you know, they sent the Patriots off today. Kev, did you go? Were you up there? No. Kevin is one of these guys. If he had the time, he would have been out there. Do we have some role on that? Well, well, we have this controversy first. Let's talk about that for a second. I don't know what is the matter with the quarterback. I mean, listen. You put your family out in a public video, somebody's going to say something snippy somewhere along the line. And, you know, some guy on the sports station in Boston said something about his daughter, called her kind of a, I'm not going to use the term here, but it's just, it wasn't that bad. She was like, Daddy, 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 soccer, 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 soccer. And, you know, and he just reacted to it. The guy didn't. Listen, anybody who's been a parent knows your 5 or 6 year old, I think that's what she is, probably 5 or 6. She's 5, you know, gets excited. You know, this guy on the radio made a snide remark. And then he takes it out on the morning show that he's had this long-standing relationship with. It's not unlike the stupid radio boycott that we had around here. It's not very world-like thinking, Tom. You know what? Take after the guy that you want to take after, not the guys that didn't have anything to do with it. Anyway, maybe it's just a Super Bowl pressure. I don't know. But you sure you weren't there, Cal?
Positive.
Yeah. You would have been.
Yes.
All right. Give me a headline on tax policy. Get this show on the road here. GOP rebels in the fast start for Trump, and of course he was just in Davos.
There's been a lot of warmth, a lot of respect for our country, and a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars, is coming into the U.S.
Welcome, sir.
Good to be here.
I've seen you write some things about the Trump presidency year one. It seems to me you're pretty bullish on some of the economic stuff.
Well, I think it's a mixed record. I think you have to look at it two ways. One, quality of leadership, and two, what's getting done. And what's getting done, there have been some good things. I think the Tax Cut and Jobs Act will turn out to be pretty good. I think some of the regulatory changes are good. I think freeing up the military is seen by ISIS losing territory was good. I think he did a superb job in getting justice, not just the Supreme Court judge appointed, but he has had more appellate judges to the U.S. Court of Appeals appointed in the first year than any president. So that's been good. And some people don't give Trump any credit. I think you have to look at the facts. There have been things that have been bad. The way that he handled Charlottesville, supporting Roy Moore, the first travel ban. So the record is mixed, but don't say there have been no accomplishment. What I find disappointing about Trump is that he is, the decorum of the office has not been good. He's been unpredictable. You elect a leader to bring us together. He's done anything but bring us together. And so when you look at his leadership ability and the decorum of the office and the respect for the presidency and the respect for the country nationally and some of the unpredictability, that's bad. But on the other hand, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The things that I mentioned before are positive.
Well, here's the funny thing. As long as the economic numbers are okay, all these other things that you and I are both concerned about don't seem to be resonating all that much.
Well, I don't know about that, because when you look at some
research... Meaning the base remains the same.
Yeah, but when you look at some polling data, you know, people who are concerned about cultural issues, And so while economics historically has come to the forefront, being number one, the concern about culture is a big issue, and how you deal with that and the civility is important. So I'm not sure about that.
This Russian thing, I mean, this is not your field of expertise. I'm sure you have an opinion on it. Does it have an impact on economic policy? The overall concept of pressure that he feels and the constant turbulent, tumultuous finger pointing that's going on back and forth, is it actually suppressing what could have been or can be even bigger economic growth?
I don't know the answer to that question, and I certainly can't get in his mind and know how he operates, but it does take energy. It takes oxygen out of the room. It's not helpful.
All right. Tell me, in terms of your leadership study, what kind of, now remember, Gary, has been in Providence City government. He's, run the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council. He has been the Department of Revenue Director. He has been the head of administration. He has done everything in state government. Tell me what kind of leadership advice you would give the White House at this point.
Well, first of all...
And you teach leadership. I mean, you consult leadership at Bryant every day.
Of course you can teach, leadership. Remember football coach Eric Parsi? He used to say that a good coach makes his player what they can be, not what they're going to be. And so the leadership that needs to come from this White House is predictability, focus, govern from the center. There are 5 or 6 things that are pretty obvious about leadership. One, you have to focus. You can't be everything to everybody, and this governs all over the place. Second is you have to govern from the center because you're dependent upon others. A good leader brings others in, so you govern from the center. You don't govern from the right or left extreme. The third is use the bully pulpit, and we have that problem here in Rhode Island. We have the problem in Washington. People like Trump spin. They don't use the bully pulpit, effectively. Those are 4 things. The 5th thing is good policy is good politics, and be pragmatic. Charlie Baker said it pretty well. Worry about whether the guy has a job, whether the kids are going to a school that will prepare them for the future, and whether the family feels safe walking around the neighborhood. If you can accomplish those 3 things in a pragmatic way and not as an ideologue, you can be a good leader. Those are the 5 leadership rules, and they fall short on most of them.
I'll tell you about Charlie Baker. I mean, there's a guy who I think has just got it figured out. He's comfortable in his own skin. He may not be the best orator we've ever seen, but he's very competent at it. I mean, his State of the Commonwealth the other night I thought was incredible in terms of the bipartisan energy in the room. There's a guy that's found his lane, huh?
I'll give you one example. He talks about a 30% earned income tax credit, which helps poor people, helps people working in lower wage jobs. And we talk about corporate welfare. So that's the difference between pragmatism and ideology.
All right, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening here in the state. There's quite the leadership battle going on in the legislature right now. We'll get Gary's take on that. Stay with us. The Senate bill is dead in the House, as written.
The Senate bill is dead in the state of Rhode Island. 2/3 of the Rhode Islanders do not support it, and therefore the House will not support it.
Okay, it's almost a world-famous piece of audio now, since it's run every media platform around. That was 1 week ago today, where the Speaker of the House, declared what he declared. The Senate, of course, has passed legislation on the PawSox and sent it to the House. Here was the Senate President's reaction to the Speaker, then we'll get Gary's reaction.
And I just think that I was a little taken aback, as I said, and I felt that with the Speaker's previous comments that he was going to allow the Senate to take the lead on this and that he would give this a hearing. I just felt that it was kind of insulting to the Senate because of all the work that we did on this particular issue during the summer months and during the fall. And I mean, at least it's very disingenuous as far as what I'm concerned, because I've never experienced anything like that, where a bill has gone over to either chamber and they weren't given either a fair hearing or it was declared that the legislation was dead. So.
And interestingly, the man whose face you saw at the beginning of that clip was the Senate Finance Chairman, Bill Connolly, who really did a lot of the legwork on this legislation. Did you follow last week, this back and forth?
A little bit, and I think it's great. I may be the only person around that think it's great because there's always conflict. And in our democratic system, conflict is healthy. So the Senate has one approach to solving a problem, the House has another. There's a conflict. There's supposed to be conflict. That's why there are two houses. There's supposed to be conflict between the branches. That's why there's checks and balances between the executive and the legislative branches. So that's not negative. And sometimes we start to score it like a ball game. Who got more runs in the first inning? Who got more runs in the second inning? The issue, and this is what we need to be concerned about, is not that there's conflict, but the issue is how that conflict is managed. And that's where we fall down sometime. Because I think healthy debate is good. I think differences of opinion are good. I think there are ways to go about it and reach compromise, which at the end of the day are probably better for the public than having one side dictate to the other side. But I do concern of how we're managing the conflict.
All right. Well, you're responding to, I think, the bigger picture. Might as well throw this up, and we'll just talk about the whole mix. This is the Senate President arguing that he's not getting the proper respect from the House of Representatives in general, and the funding he's looking for policy positions, because that operating entity that no one knows about but exists for about $45 million worth of spending in the legislature, the JCLS, which is made up of 3 members of the House and 2 members of the Senate, hasn't met since 2006. And so the Speaker kind of owns the budget and controls the Senate, and the Senate President's not having it.
And you're right. And
what I really want is, I want to have the same treatment for my colleagues in the Senate that the House gets. We're a separate, co-equal
Treatment means what, Senator? What does that mean?
I want to be able to work my own budget. I think the Senate deserves their own budget. As I said before, we operate with a little less people than the House operates.
Meaning you never, do you want to generate your own budget?
No, I want to split the budget that the House and the Senate have for JCLS, and I want the Senate to have their own budget so we can fill our vacancies and do what we have to do in order to continue to operate.
Okay.
I'm not looking for any more money.
That's government. So the two got something resolved at dinner last night. The day after, last week, the day after they had dinner, Kate Bramson from the Journal, who has been covering the Paw Sox and other business matters, gets hired as a policy wonk for a nice, healthy 6-figure salary at the Senate. So obviously they broke some bread and had a couple of cocktails and figured out part of that. So let's go backwards before we go back to the Paw Sox, since you went in the general direction. You like the friction. Mm-hmm. Do you think the Senate and the House ought to be operating as equal branches of government when it comes to financial self-determination?
Well, if you look at the role of the House and the Senate, they're different. There are twice as many members of the House. The House has to start the budget process. The Senate has confirmation powers. And so we've created a House and a Senate. They're not photocopies of each other. That's part of the checks and balances. I think the bigger issue that the Senate President is speaking about, and has been speaking about for the last 3 or 4 decades, is there's a real lack of transparency.
Meaning all Senate Presidents?
All Senate Presidents, to one degree or another, all House Speakers to one degree or another. They've had this argument. But the real problem from a taxpayer perspective is there's not sufficient transparency in how the legislature spends its money. That's the issue. It's not whether there are 3 people on the Joint Committee on Legislative Services or 2, because there are really only 2. There's a speaker.
Well, I'm not sure, Gary, that those 2 are arguing about that point. You may be making a larger, more important point. I don't think that's their argument.
And I think the argument is this. You can say there are 5 people on this Joint Committee on Legislative Services, which it gets back to my point about transparency. Because if there's transparency, you could follow these conversations. But at the end of the day, there are really 2 people. There's the House Speaker and the Senate President, and they have to work the differences out. As a taxpayer, I wish there would be more transparency in what the budget issues are. We spend $45 million on the budget, but so they had a difference.
So let's talk about the Paw Sox thing specifically. Your take on that case as we speak is?
Well, it's interesting because I'm probably the only person in the state that doesn't have a position on it because I can't get very excited about it. But there are 2 questions, and you've talked about these questions on your radio show. The first question is should we do it? It's a public policy, political issue. And people pay their money and take their choice. Whatever position they come out to, I respect. It's clouded. And it's not just clouded by 38 studios. It's clouded by something else. the whole, or a vast portion of our economic development policy in the state is based on giving rich people tax incentives. You know, we're subsidizing 4 or 5 hotels, apartment houses, you name it. And so you got Joe Sixpack sitting in Cranston, and he's looking at these guys that it seemed to him be in pretty good shape, getting this largesse from the state, so they build things. And so the Poor Sox Stadium enters the discussion. That's coloring the political public policy question for obvious reasons. Once you get past that question, the second question is, did your elected representatives do their due diligence? Do they know what the risks are? Have they built in, you know, proper safeguards to manage those risks? And those are judgments that there may be differences on, but there's no reason that we can certainly agree on the facts there.
I would suggest, though, I think your point is well taken. I think the 38 Studios thing has made people somewhat depressed, others more acutely aware of what's going on, and maybe they're paying attention to the latter point that you're making. But I would assert that if 38 didn't blow up the way it did, this Poor Sox Stadium thing would have a much smoother
I don't think there's any question about it. But 38 Studios did blow up. And the failure to really have an independent investigation and wash all the laundry and get everything behind us is created a problem. But on top of that, then we create an economic development system which is basically focused on giving tax incentives,
picking winners and losers.
Okay, and now we come along and this we're talking. After all, let's be very clear what we're talking about. We're talking about a minor league baseball park. We're not talking about a major league baseball park. We're not talking about Amazon headquarters too. We're talking about a minor league baseball park. It has certain economic, social, and cultural, value. That's part of the community. But that's what we're talking about. So people see that, and they look at the people who are behind this project, and this is not the fault of the people in government, but they did a lousy job in making their proposal initially when it was in Providence.
Oh yeah.
And so you built on a history of 38 Studios, corporate welfare, a proposal coming out that looked like it was just another largesse to some, fat cats, and you have to overcome that. And so they created a mountain for themselves to climb before you can get to the real conversation.
Well, I'd hate to see if you actually had a point of view on it. That was a great analysis. I mean, if you ever were passionate about it, you'd really, really, really have something to say. But I think all your points are, I mean, actually you put a lot of check marks on what all the issues are. And, over the next couple of weeks, we'll see if the House actually even provides a hearing. We come back, short take on the governor's state of the state and a campaign that is yet to get started. Stay with us. The governor's theme in the State of the State, Gary, last week was let's keep it going. This is right in your wheelhouse. Are we doing enough well to keep it all going?
I hope we'd have higher expectations. I read some numbers which, and I don't want to be wonkish, but they were part of the budget, so I'll mention them to you. And every year we have a revenue estimating conference that comes up with the official numbers that we use, but we also come up with an economic forecast which the government has to include in their budget. And so let me mention some numbers to you, and you tell me whether we should keep it going or do something better. Between fiscal 18 and fiscal 23, the average annual increase in jobs is 0.5%, less than 1% growth per year on average in jobs. Personal income average over that 5-year period is growing at 4%. Inflation is growing between 2.3 and 2.5%, so there's really not a lot of growth in income. And the cherry on the cake, if this is really good, is our unemployment rate is projected to go up from 4.1% to 4.9% at the end of that period. I don't think it's so great.
What's the 30-second answer?
I think the 30-second answer is, we talked about it before, be pragmatic. When you do an economic development program, worry about how it's going to affect this guy sitting in Warwick or Cranston or Smithfield. And so we've given out a lot of tax incentives to some very good companies. General Electric, Virgin Pulse, Johnson & Johnson, all very good. But show me how we've connected the dots. We have good projects, but how have we connected the dots? How is the working family in Rhode Island tying into that? And when I give you a number that the economic forecast between fiscal 18 and 23 has employment growing by less than 1%, turn that around and say, what's going to happen to my kid? I got 2 kids or 3 kids at home. where are they going to be? In Chicago, in Atlanta, or in Providence?
And that's a question that I'm sure you can ask on both the state and federal level. Bob Flanders, the former state Supreme Court justice, months ago now, announced that he's going to be running for U.S. Senate, and now you're advising him. He's running against our junior senator, somewhat entrenched, Sheldon Whitehouse.
There's a primary before that, you know.
Huh?
There's a primary before
Oh,
that.
yeah, forgot about that. You know what, I tongue-in-cheek forgot about that. I don't see that primary as a viable one. Do you?
No, well, you have to play all the games on the schedule. Yeah, and 1 week it's Alabama, and next week it's Furman. So you play your games, and
Right.
you take them serious.
So the state representative from Cranston, who were overdue to get in here, I think he actually suggested that Flanders should get out of the race a week after Flanders announced, which was crazy. But anyway, the point of the matter is that we don't hear much from him. I'm sure he's raising money and building an organization and all that kind of stuff, but he better get out of the box.
Well, I think you'll see that soon. You're right. He is, working on an organization and raising money because it's expensive to run against for any seat, but it's certainly against an incumbent senator who's well funded by special interest groups, which he's advocated, for. So a lot is happening behind the scenes.
He's got to get going.
I mean, I don't know one disagrees.
Good to talk to you. Keep
my
it going
pleasure.
at Bryant. Gary
Thank you.
Sasse. We'll come back and a little mention about the Grammys. What was going on there last night? So I watched all of the Grammys last night for the first time maybe in 20 years. Enjoyed it. And I'm not a big Trump guy, but what was this?
And Fury spoken word auditions, take one.
Trump won't read anything. He gets up halfway through meetings with world leaders because he is bored.
Cut! Sorry, John. It's wonderful. It just feels a bit too smooth. I don't think it's going to work. Next!
His comb-over, semicolon, the color was a product called Just for Men. The longer it was left on, the darker it got. Impatience resulted in Trump's orange blonde hair color.
Cut!
Trump did not enjoy his own inauguration. He started to get angry and hurt that stars were determined to embarrass him. I definitely wasn't there.
Cut! Spoken word, Cardi B.
If Trump was not having his 6:30 dinner with Steve Bannon, then more to his liking, he was in bed by that time with a cheeseburger. Why am I even reading this? I can't believe this. I can't believe that this is how he lives his life.
He reprimanded the housekeeping staff for picking up his shirt from the floor. If my shirt is on the floor, it's because I want it on the floor. Another one. It's We the Best. It's DJ Khaled. Matter of fact, this is the best spoken word album in the game. I'm finally gonna win my Grammy.
So this isn't gonna work. Next!
It's not gonna work. Everything I do works.
Stand by. Take one.
He had a long-time fear of being poisoned. One reason why he liked to eat at McDonald's. Nobody knew he was coming, and the food was safely pre-made.
That's it. We've got it. That's the one.
You think so?
Oh, yeah.
The Grammy's in the bag?
In the bag.
I'm just not sure that the entertainment industry, musicians specifically in this case, understand that throwing Hillary Clinton up there does not sell the country. It just doesn't. It's like I like a little retro music, and frankly, most of the music, and by the way, Don't Cry For Me, Argentina, world performance, followed by SZA? What's a SZA? Anyway, it's politically retro for this country. You may not like Donald Trump, but you're moving on. The Grammys ought to, too. See you on the radio tomorrow at 3 on WPRO.